Well, I was right. One of my very first videos on this channel was an explanation of why I didn't think homosexuality was a sin. I took my reasoning mostly from Matthew Vine's approach. My reasoning was, simply enough, that I didn't think there was a single passage that clearly said it was. Do not sleep with a man in the bed of a woman is not a crystal clear phrase. However, that's because back then, I was Baptist. St. Redeem Zoomer once said, "The problem with Baptists is that you can have this liberal come along and point out that the Bible can be interpreted this way or that way differently, and since you don't care at all about tradition, you'll buy it." It is a very Baptist approach to just say, well, if the Bible don't tell you to do it, who the heck is anyone else to do so? And that's fine logic if you're a Baptist. I think it's a legitimate position for a Christian to take. But I'm not a Baptist. Far from it. I'm a high church Anglo-Catholic. As an Anglo-Catholic, I believe that the Holy Spirit is in every Christian. And so the teachings of the vast majority of the church, especially over a long period of time and across cultures, are very trustworthy. So I came to realize an apparent contradiction. I was making cases for infant baptism, purgatory, and church unity from tradition, but I was still holding on to this belief that, without a doubt, contradicts a crystal clear consensus throughout church history. And there's no real dispute. Every commentary until the 20th century agrees that passage means that men should not have sex with men. Eusebius, Aristides, Basil, John Chrysostom, and several church councils, among others, all have clear teachings against homosexuality. To my knowledge, we have no Christian sources condoning homosexuality before the Protestant Reformation. Since the Bible doesn't say anything to the contrary, I'm going to have to believe that the widespread consensus was the result of the guidance of the Holy Spirit through the Apostolic Church. However, and this is a big however, we can also trace Episcopal Church structure back to at least the 2nd century. And it was pretty much the consensus until basically Zwingli.
Hello, Lucia.
So make of that what you will. Secondly, I changed my mind because of how the Bible views sex and marriage. The biblical purpose of sex, in my opinion, and the opinion of most historic Christianity, is twofold: procreative and unitive, specifically for the strengthening of the marriage bond. 1 Corinthians 7 clearly teaches that marriage is the only proper place for the fulfillment of sexual desire. He essentially says, if you're okay with not having sex, it's good not to get married. But if you're really burning with lust, get married and have that with your spouse only. So I think it's fair to say that if you're going to have sex, you have to get married. The question is now, is same-sex marriage biblical? And I'd argue not. Look at marriage in the Bible. Couples are given very specific instructions on what their spousal dynamics should look like. We are told twice, wives, submit to your husband. Eve is made as the helper to Adam. The wives are called the weaker vessels in their relationships. The blueprints for marriage are very specific, and they don't really work for gay couples. There's no adaptation of it that can be used to include gay and lesbian marriages without either taking on the roles of another gender or boiling down marriage to nothing but romance and sex. Ultimately, I think this comes down to the bottom of the issue. We, Christians, have really eroded what marriage means. We decide that all it is a proper place for sex and children. We forget about the countless verses that outline the proper structure for marriage. We ignore such detailed instructions because we're afraid of being sexist. And as a result, we have concluded that marriage is nothing but the sex and romance between two people. And, why can't two dudes or two girls have that? We need to realize that marriage is not just love and sex. It's a system. It's a structure with very specific blueprints and roles that, according to scriptures, are quite dogmatic. Marriage was made as the smallest building block of society to create a complementary system where two individuals can pool their natural strengths and preferences to help each other thrive and create a stable new generation. Bottom line is this: sex was given to us to strengthen the marital union, the highly organized, smallest unit of society between a man and his helper, his wife, and to enable them to raise a family together. Gay people can't have this marital union in the same way. It by definition will end up violating gender roles or violating the hierarchical sacramental system. But what about Dave and Johnny, huh? Weren't they gay? Well, the evidence is strong. But was that God ordained? David sure had a complicated sex life that obviously was not 100% moral. He stole 2 of his wives, one of them by murdering her husband and committing adultery with her, and the other of which he neglected. There is no particular condemnation of his stealing and subsequently neglecting his wife, McCall, but, we all know what's wrong. There's no reason to believe that Johnathan's stuff was okay with God either, just because it isn't ever outrightly condemned in that book. And the third reason I changed my mind is the Bible passages. Yes, I changed my mind about a couple, specifically the New Testament ones. My case about Romans was simply not straightforward. It is true that people will have sex outside their orientation just because of the sexual gratification with no effort towards the emotional bonds. And that is bad, but that's not what a straightforward reading of this passage provides. When he says they forsook the natural use of women and burned with lust for each other, the average reader is going to assume they're just talking about gay relations. Could it be interpreted otherwise? Yeah, it could. Is that kind of just trying to weasel in an idea because of preconceived biases? Yeah, I'm afraid it is. Secondly, I argue that the word arsenokoites.
Me believe it pronounced
arsenokoipes.
Oh, really? That's what you believe? Well, I believe I don't tell you how to eat cookies, so don't tell me how to pronounce words. I don't need this. All right, I'm out of here. I'm done. Wow, he really stormed out of there.
Was a reference back to the Leviticus passage, but that's not necessarily true. Yes, the word aren and koite are both used in the LXX passage, and this is a compound of those two words, but that's not a super strong argument. It's more likely he's just using the relatively common words meaning man and bed, a common euphemism for sex, to say those who sleep with men. I mean, that's a pretty straightforward read. Finally, to close, I'd like to draw some other reminders. First, and lots of you are going to hate this, but this is an in-house issue. I am no more of a Christian because I changed my mind. Matthew Vines can be a totally legit Christian who is just wrong. This group has reasons and logic behind their stance. They aren't just rejecting the Bible and throwing it out the window. They're actually trying to get to the bottom of the issue, legitimately. But are they wrong? And secondly, this is not some appalling, horrible sin compared to all other sins. It is just another example of misusing sex, which is extremely common. This does not need to be the defining issue Christians fight for. Only 8% of Americans are LGBTQ. 95% have had premarital sex. Which do you think is a bigger cultural disease? We have a habit when someone says, I'm gay. We're like, living in sin, repent, you dirty rotten. But when someone's in a sexual relationship before marriage, we're just like, well, happens to the best of us. At least he's not gay. You can confront your divorced son with the exact same way you would your practicing gay son. I think here's what everyone needs to realize. We aren't just anti-gay sex. We're anti-straight sex before marriage, outside of marriage. We're anti-divorce. We're anti-marrying an unbeliever. All sorts of other practices. Because ultimately, we honor marriage and the marriage bed. Sex was given to us to strengthen the sacramental Christian interdependent union between a man and his helper, his wife, and to enable them to raise a family together. God has very specific instructions on how to best achieve these ends, if that is what we are called to do. Sex is not a game. It's not a toy. It's a highly restricted gift for a godly couple.